Joe presents Pioneers, together with Open Money. Financial advice for all.
Hello and welcome to Pioneers. My guest this week is Tessa Clarke, co-founder of Olio, the food sharing app that connects neighbours and local businesses to one another. A sort of Tinder for food sharing, if you will, with 1 in 9 people either starving or suffering from malnutrition and the average UK family throwing away about £700 worth of food a year. Olio has almost 750,000 users with a further 1.25 million portions of food shared in more than 30 countries. The mission is for 1 billion people to be using Olio in a decade. And over the next hour, we'll find out why. Welcome, Tessa.
Thank you.
So, Tinder for food sharing, how does that sit with you? Is that all right?
Well, I think Tinder is used pretty ubiquitously. So I would like to think that Olio will also be used ubiquitously.
Well, I mean, it's a deeply ambitious mission, 1 billion people using Olio. And we will get into that later. But
Okay.
So I want to start earlier on. A lot of the guests who come on the show, they talk about their entrepreneurial spirit starting at, as they walked, they had that. It wasn't really the case for you, though. Yours was a different start.
It was, yes, not at all. And in fact, I've always been sort of in awe and slightly intimidated by those people whose sort of entrepreneurialism started from infancy. For me, I was born on a farm. So my parents are still farming to this day up in North Yorkshire. And really, I sort of wasn't brought up around the world of business at all. Although, actually, having said that, clearly my dad's farm is a business, but I guess I didn't really look at it in that way. But growing up in that sort of childhood, you learn the value of hard work, so and enterprise, and you also, I think, learn how stressful it can be, but also how rewarding when you're able to be master of your own destiny. So I didn't have any sort of role models of people going off to work as such, because our family life was work, and there was no difference between life and work. But I then went and pursued a very classic corporate career, which didn't in any way feel entrepreneurial, but this bug started growing inside me. And I had this sort of desire. I was getting sick and tired of being inspired by other people and not being inspired by myself and my own life.
So you wanted a little autonomy in that. So you went from there and to what people might not necessarily consider the natural carry-on. You go from there to Cambridge, from Cambridge to Stanford.
Yes.
And that is where you met someone who definitely shaped your future. And I don't want to give away what happened at the end, but what were your first impressions? And I still am, I find this name remarkable. An Iowa girl called Sasha Celestial One.
Yes, yeah.
I mean, what? Even with your travels to that point, that must have been a remarkable first introduction. Hello.
It is.
I'm Sasha Celestial One.
And to this day, we still have great fun going into sort of the heart of Mayfair or investor offices and watching the receptionist's faces drop when they realise that you're being serious. That really is her name, Celestial One. Yeah, so Sasha's parents are hippies from Iowa.
I would not have guessed.
No, I know. Kelsey Breeze. And that really is her name.
And what were your first impressions? You met her...
I did. I met her. It seemed she was just very American, and I guess I was sort of very British. So it was just a very interesting meeting of two very different people. But it took some time for us to kind of get to know each other. But we had both come from quite unconventional backgrounds, and I think to a certain extent probably suffered a little bit from imposter syndrome, wondering why on earth we were there. So we bonded over that. And both of us have always been interested in sustainability and wanting to do something good and positive. Plus, we used to have a lot of fun going out and partying together as well, which always helps.
Never a bad thing.
No, exactly.
So you went from there and you go, I know there's a couple of other mid-steps, but I was really interested in the idea that you went then to Dyson, which is kind of the archetypal entrepreneurial. It's up there with the Branson kind of brand. So what was the attraction to go to that job? What made you think this is the move?
Yeah, I got headhunted for that role, and I had another equally exciting job offer in London, but for some bizarre reason, which to this day I do not understand, it sort of felt like fate. I just felt like I had to take the slightly less obvious role, which was to leave London, which is where I'd lived for 10 years. I was sort of a young single girl about town, up sticks and moved to Bath to work for Dyson, knowing nobody. And but it was an incredible... I ended up actually sort of meeting my husband on the first day that I moved to Bath, so definitely there's some fate involved there. It was a good move, yeah. But it was fascinating working for an owner-managed sort of, private company. So prior to that, I've been working for EMAP, which was a FTSE 100 media company, very much subject to the turmoils of the stock exchange and that sort of, and media in that time was in crisis. The digital revolution was happening. And so then to be able to go and work for a privately owned company and understand the benefits of being able to take a truly long scale, a long time horizon to how you're building and developing the business and also your products was really, really refreshing. What excited me about the role that I took was that whilst Dyson's an incredibly innovative company with regards to its products, it still hadn't embraced digital and understood what digital should mean for the organisation across every function, so across their retail, but across their marketing, HR, finance, etc. And that was my role, to take Dyson on a digital journey.
I mean, there's a lot that makes sense to me when I was reading through your bio about the Dyson move. It seemed not just the serendipity of meeting your partner there as well, but in Bath, but it seemed to make sense from a brand point of view that the next move, and we'll get into some constraints about talking about it, but the next move to me just seemed like, especially with what you're doing now, the kind of the ethical backbone of it. It seemed like an odd move to Wonga, the payday lender, or I'm sure there's a different term for it, a more PC term for it. But what prompted that move?
Well, so I was on maternity leave from Dyson, and that sort of entrepreneurial bug had started, and I had lots of ideas and actually written a pretty detailed business plan for a particular idea. And I shared it with the only entrepreneur that I had ever met at that point in time, which was Errol, who was the founder of the Wonga Group. And he said, yes, that's absolutely brilliant, but why don't you come and join me? We're setting up a brand new business called Pay Later. It is an e-commerce payment by installment product. So it enables customers who perhaps, for example, might want to buy something like a Dyson, but they can't afford to outlay £300 or £400 all at once. But similarly, they don't want the lack of discipline that comes with a credit card, where the debt can roll over and over and spiral. And so actually, we want to bring sort of the old-fashioned hire purchase into an e-commerce environment, priced extremely competitively. And given my background at Dyson, I could understand the market need for exactly such a product. So I went to head up Pay Later, which was a global business in the UK and India at the time. But to cut a very long story short, within 3 months, I was asked to do some strategy work for Wonga UK, because I very quickly realised I couldn't do my job when the other business was undergoing such difficulties. And I did a 6-week piece of strategy work and explained to the board exactly the level of challenges that business faced, what the true business model was, and was asked to take over the business and kickstart the turnaround.
I mean, it must, again, you mentioned a difficult period of time. That was the period where there were fake legal letters, I think, sent.
Well, that happened, that stopped 7 years prior to me starting with the company. But
was it the news of it that hit the cycle at that point?
The news of that came out, I mean, and after I took the role,
so arriving, it must feel actually a bit of a weird betrayal if you meet somebody, you present to them a great idea for their business, and they neglect to mention that there's about to be, and I understand you may have some restrictions on talking about it, but with everything you've mentioned at every stage of your life, there's a teachable point there. So for you, what did you take from that period? And I know that you experienced some, you pregnant with your child and experienced some significant online attacks, some pretty disgusting vitriol aimed at you. And regardless of the larger picture and the history of Wonga, that's one of those terrible things. What did you take from that period?
A couple of things. So first of all, the importance of your own moral compass. So I had some really difficult times there where I discovered things, and I had to look to my own internal compass to figure out what to do about that. And sometimes I was kind of, I guess, trying to swim upstream. That was very challenging, and I can remember sort of consulting with some of my friends about what I should do. And I decided, even if it was going to end my career, that I would do what I believed was the right thing to do. And so I stuck by that, and it was terrifying at the time, but it was the right thing to do. So sort of, I think, hold on to your moral compass, because at the end of the day, that's actually all you've got and what you need to be accountable to. The other thing I saw really was, I think, the dangers of exponential growth, the dangers of lots of venture capital money, and the dangers of losing sight of or not understanding who your customers really are. Because there was a mismatch, I think, in terms of who the product was intended for originally and who the product ended up being used by. And the organisation did not figure that out and didn't recognise that.
So you were based in Switzerland, right,
yes.
at this point.
Yep.
So this is rather key, really, because it was. There's a story about when you chose to move home, when you were leaving, that I think is quite pivotal to Olio, to what's going on now. So can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so it was moving day, leaving Geneva, packing everything up, and the removal men said to me that I had to throw away all of our uneaten food. And obviously that is something that I was not going to do. And so I, much to their irritation, stopped packing, packed up my newborn baby and toddler, which, if you've got kids, will know in and of itself takes about an hour just to get out of the house. Clutching this food, went off to try and find someone to share it with. The lady I was hoping to share it with wasn't there that day. I got very over-emotional about the fact that I sort of tried to share this food and had failed. I thought about knocking on my neighbours' doors and just realised that's really inefficient. I haven't got the time to do that. And even if they were in, it would be really awkward and embarrassing, because they might not want my random collection of food. Yep. So I ended up going back to my apartment. I was not to be defeated, so I packed the non-perishable food into my packing boxes and thought at that time, I'm probably now performing a criminal offence. This is absolutely absurd that there isn't an app for me to share this food. I'd worked in digital for 10 or 15 years. I knew there was an app for everything, and was absolutely stunned to discover there wasn't an app to share food.
I mean, that was the light bulb moment for you. But was the light bulb moment actually, as you just said, it was this, I'm going to do the app for this, or was it, I need to just find some means to share food or to stop waste?
So at that time, I was once again churning away through lots of entrepreneurial ideas, and I had a list of about sort of 10 that I had somewhat fleshed out, and I sort of added this concept into the bank. I talked to a few people about it, and most people thought it was just the stupidest idea they had ever heard of. Like, there's no way strangers are going to share food with each other from their fridges and their kitchens. You've definitely got baby brain, Tessa. But it was when Sasha and I were already working on something together, and we'd spent a month working on it. We realised that startup idea did not have the potential that it needed to have. And I went upstairs, put my baby down to nap, and I came down again. I said, Sasha, I did have this other idea. It's really crazy, but just hear me out. And I explained the concept, my story, and the concept of an app that would connect neighbours to share food. Her sort of inner hippie immediately sprung to life, got it, loved it. We did sort of a 1-hour mini MBA on the idea there and then. And by the end of that hour, we were both committed to making Olio happen.
What made you so sure that this previous idea, which didn't have legs, this idea would have the legs? This would be the thing. Because you already mentioned there's lots of people who've told you it was just a crazy idea. Because
we tried to, one of the things that we did in this hour was to try and figure out what all the alternative solutions to the problem of food waste in the home could be. And quite frankly, none of them stood up or in any way vaguely credible. So we knew that a third of all the food that's produced globally gets thrown away. We knew that in countries such as the UK and US, half of that takes place in the home. And we just didn't think that any other solutions were realistic, and we just thought that, quite frankly, there has to be a solution that's better than the rubbish bin.
So you grew up on a farm. You'd obviously you've done a lot of business education, but you must have done some extra educating of yourself in terms of food waste.
Yes.
When you first started to look at the numbers, and I've looked at the numbers because you've talked about them so often in your interviews. When you first started to look at the numbers, what was your response? Because they do appear just horrifying.
It was, I can only describe it as being, when you have those nightmares and you're sort of screaming, or you're locked in a prison and no one can hear you?
Yeah.
It felt like that. We would just we're having to double and triple check sources to believe that this can really be the case. So, I mean, food waste really is one of the biggest problems facing humanity today, and it's hidden in plain sight. The problem is once you see it, you can't then unsee it. It's absolutely everywhere. But I think we've all just become very numbed and anaesthetized to it. So, yeah, I touched on earlier on, so globally we throw away a third of all the food we produce, which is worth over $1 trillion US. So in any business, that is just an unacceptable level of inefficiency. We then have 800 million people who are going to bed hungry every night who could be fed on a quarter of the food that is wasted in the Western world. And I think also...
It's a remarkable juxtaposition, isn't it? That is
so we have more than... The world currently is awash with food. We have more than enough food than we need for everybody, yet we have such widespread hunger. And even, I think, what has shocked us most on the Olio journey is discovering how much hunger there is in a country like the UK. So we have 8.4 million people living in food poverty, which I like to point out to people is equivalent to the population of London. And half of those people are living in severe food poverty, which means they do not know where their next meal is coming from. So we've got widespread waste, we've got just unconscionable levels of hunger, and then we've got the environmental impact of food waste, which I had no clue about. So food waste is the third largest source of greenhouse gas emissions, so essentially climate change, after the USA and China. And in fact, a very influential book was written last year called Project Drawdown, which said, enough of the doom and gloom about climate change. Let's stack rank the top 100 solutions. And in position number 3 was reducing food waste. And that came above electric cars and above solar power.
But just not as sexy in terms of
no.
government agendas, is it?
Although Olio has been is in vogue this month, so which I'm absolutely thrilled about because it means that maybe food waste is getting sexy.
Yeah. I mean, it's an interesting mashup of business and community that you have to, and maybe we shouldn't be surprised. You grew up on a farm and community is second nature to you, but it doesn't take more than a cursory look around to realise that community is perhaps not as united as it once was. What made you think that idea would work? The idea of talking to your neighbours, certainly in London, maybe doesn't seem as obvious as it might once have. No,
and that's, again, so there's been several things that have really surprised us about the journey. So I think we probably imagined a very efficient marketplace that would enable the redistribution of food. We didn't understand the scale of hunger, and we didn't understand just how isolated people are in their communities and how actually way above sort of food waste, Olio is first and foremost about community. And so people are telling us all day, every day, it just feels amazing to meet people in my community when I've lived here for years, perhaps, and I've never known anybody, to discover new parts of my neighbourhood, just feel like I'm doing something sort of positive. And people share stories about, they moved house and someone they met via Olio brings them a housewarming gift, or someone, made them a gift for Christmas. And there's just all these small little, I guess, kind of acts of everyday kindness. People are telling us the whole time, my faith in humanity has been restored through Olio. And whilst on the surface of it, sort of connecting strangers to share food sounds weird, actually, if you unpeel it a little bit, human beings have been, and this is, I guess, coming back to my social anthropology back at university, but humans have been sharing food for 2 million years. And if you speak to anyone about why we have evolved so successfully as a species, it's because we're almost unique in that we have shared our single most precious resource. And it's only in the past 30, 40, 50 years, as we have moved away from our families, moved into these small boxes. In many ways, technology has isolated us from our community. And it's only recently that we've lost that ability to share. But actually, when you try it, and that's our biggest challenge, is encouraging people to give it a go. When you try it, you realise it feels good. It feels good to give something to someone who wants it, and it feels amazing to give something to someone who needs it. And actually, it does feel pretty horrible throwing food in the bin.
Has this restored your faith in community, in society?
It has, but I think we have a massive challenge ahead of us in that we're a business, and most people assume that only charities can do good in the world. And we like to say that we're about community, not charity, and both have an extremely important role to play. But what we hear from our users, many of whom are living in extremely, extremely difficult times, what they love most is that it is about community. And what that means is there's no stigma attached.
Community played a large role in you launching this. I mean, you had an extensive, I think, WhatsApp group at the beginning, which was your test base.
Yeah.
Who was in there? Yeah. How did they help you refine your idea?
Yeah, so that played an absolutely invaluable role. So the first thing we did, as I've shared, was sort of the market research. So that horrified us. We then said the next step we need to figure out, it might be a massive problem, but do people care about it? So the next thing we did was a market research survey via SurveyMonkey. Key insight from that showed that 1 in 3 people told us they were physically pained throwing away good food. So we were like, wow, okay, this is a really big mainstream problem.
So, sorry, 1 in 3
people said that
pained.
they were physically pained. And we used deliberately extreme language because we wanted to get away from, food waste is bad, because I think most people say food waste is bad.
You really wanted to polarize them into
really wanted to polarize them into saying, I feel that. I feel that physical pain. So that was obviously great news for us, but it didn't mean to say that they would take the next step in our hypothesis, which is to share food with a stranger. And before we sort of sunk essentially our life savings into building Olio, we needed to de-risk that a lot, because Sasha and I are both breadwinners of our families, so a lot was riding on this. So we thought, how can we test this hypothesis in a really low-cost way? So what we did was we invited 12 people who had responded to that survey, who lived really close to one another. So it was all up in North London, sort of Finsbury Park, Crouch End area. And we emailed them. We'd never met these people. We said, hey, do you mind taking part in this sort of slightly crazy experiment? We're going to put you onto a WhatsApp group with 11 other people for a 2-week period. And during that period of time, if you have any food that you don't want to eat, if you can just share it into this group and we'll see what happens. So we waited with bated breath for I think about 24 hours waiting for someone to share some food. And then someone did share half a bag of shallots, which is very Crouch End.
What a lovely way to start your experiment, with half a bag of shallots.
It was quite funny. And within sort of 23 minutes, someone claimed it. And then throughout the next 2 weeks, we saw that group of 12 people sharing food. We then met with those 12 people face-to-face for the first time in various sort of coffee shops and thanked them for doing this slightly weird thing for us and asked them for their feedback. And they gave us a ton of feedback. But the 3 sort of key messages that came out were, 1, you have to do this. 2, it only needs to be slightly better than a WhatsApp group. And in parallel, we read The Lean Startup by Eric Ries, and just having that permission from our users, just saying it doesn't. We'd assumed
not all the bells and whistles.
Not all the bells and whistles. We'd assume that if you're connecting strangers to share food, of course we need user ratings. And they told us, no, we just need to be able to do something that's slightly better than a WhatsApp group. And then the third thing they said was, how can I help? And we were like, well, actually, you can help. You can be our sort of first ambassadors. And when we sort of launch the app, you can make sure that you have a cupboard clear out. You can spread the word. You can tell your friends. And that was really the genesis of our ambassador program, which today has about 25,000 ambassadors.
You're watching Pioneers, together with Open Money.
So nothing like this gets off the ground, even with a group of 12 amazing volunteers, now ambassadors, without some initial funding. How do you get, this is one of those questions that for many of the entrepreneurs that we've talked to and for many of the people who are interested in this subject it's the crux of everything. They've done a lot of the work, and they get to that point where they have to convince people with money and people who are congruent with their values with money that they've got something viable.
Yeah.
How did you go about that with this?
Sadly, we've raised money 3 times now. Sadly, the first time is not at all replicable, how we did it. I wish we could do it again. I went and asked for advice and got investment.
So, yeah, see, it would be lovely just to leave it at that, but everybody is now saying, how did you do that? How did you go and ask for advice? How
I did that was I went to see, and it felt like actually I was sort of taking quite some courage to do this. I contacted the investors who were on the board of Wonga, who were the only investors that I knew of, and asked for some of their time to share with them what I was doing. I went into the meeting saying, I'm not looking for investment from you, but I like to think that at some point in time, Olio will be in a position where you will want to invest. I don't want to screw up now and make us sort of uninvestable for you. And so I taught them in classic, here's the problem, here's our solution, here's how we're going. And Sonali, who was the partner at Excel, she just absolutely loved what we were doing. It's very rare to see entrepreneurs coming in with such an enormous sort of white space, and she was very much backing Sasha and I as a team to make it happen.
You mentioned, let's take it past the first round, which is not replicable, as you said. Did you get people to buy into what you were trying to develop? Because it's not just an app to monetize the sharing of food. You're trying to solve what do you say, listed third in the climate change challenges.
So we have always been we always start off our pitch by talking about the specific problem that we are solving, which is a problem of food waste in the home, and then we go on to sort of talk about how we're doing it. But we do also always spend some time talking about our long-term vision. And our long-term vision is of 1 billion people around the world connected to share our most precious resource, bar none. Why? Because the world needs that to happen. If we are to stand any chance whatsoever of mitigating the worst impacts of climate change, we have to stop throwing away food. But actually, Olio is not just about preventing food and food waste, it's about community enabling a more sustainable way of living. So at the moment, society's whole model is one of consumption, and business is one of consumption. And we essentially extract resources from the planet, we use them for 5% of their useful life, and then we discard them into landfill. Now, that was maybe fine when there were a couple of 100 million or maybe 1 billion or 2 people living on the planet. We're going to have 10 billion people living on this planet by 2050. By definition, that model is not sustainable. And I guess the easy sort of manifestation of that is the concept of Earth Overshoot Day, which says, what is the day in the year in which humanity has used up all the resources that the Earth can replenish in that year? And back in 1969 and 1970, when Earth Overshoot Day was first measured, that was the 31st of December. So what that means is that humanity used up in a year all the resources that could be replenished in a year. Fantastic. Fast forward to this year, Earth Overshoot Day was the 1st of August. Now, what that means is that every single thing that every single one of us 7.5 billion people are consuming after the 1st of August is net depletive to the planet. So it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that this model of consumption is by definition unsustainable. And we want to change the model. And already Olioers are telling us that rather than thinking, I want something, I go to the shops to buy something brand new, they're thinking, I want or need something. I look on Olio and I see what I can get from my immediate community, my immediate neighborhood, and then I shop after that. And so we really want to change that model, and instead it be one where we extract resources from the planet and then they circulate round and round and round and round our local communities, being fully utilized for 95% of their life, and then there is a small amount of waste that is generated. I
mean, it's got every sentence almost is full of a stat that takes your breath away a little bit. And,
sadly, yes.
So it's got to be frustrating for you to look at things like major retailers and their food waste. How have you approached that? How have you?
It's absolutely. It's one of those things, sometimes you wish your eyes could be closed again because it's extremely painful having them opened, in particular, not just around...
reading, I'll be honest, reading your bio, reading your information has certainly done that. To turn the page, someone who thinks of themselves as reasonably conscious about these things, you turn a page and there's another
There is, and I find it extremely painful, so not just on a food waste level, but waste more generally. So every single day when I walk into a supermarket, and 95% of that is plastic crap that's going to end up in landfill or in our oceans. And everything, my children are being marketed at from before they can walk or talk to try and persuade them to have something plastic and disposable. So yes, very unsustainable. With regards to food waste specifically, whilst retailers account for less than 5% of food waste in the UK, which sounds like a relatively small, it is a small percentage of the overall problem. Actually, when you see it in real life, how much food that is, that's an enormous amount of food. And we've found that on Olio, The demand for food is almost insatiable. So half of all our listings are requested in less than 2 hours.
Really?
So for us to be able to accelerate our pace of growth, we are now working with businesses to enable them to become zero waste. And so how it works is we'll recruit volunteers through the app. We match them up with their local supermarket, bakery, deli, cafe, and they'll provide a service to that business whereby they will, I'll leave my flat at 7 or 8 p.m. on a Monday night, and I will go to Pret-a-Manger. I will collect their unsold food. I take it home and I redistribute it to the local community. And it takes between 1 and 2 hours for all of that food to go from being in that store to completely redistributed into the local community and being eaten.
I mean, it sounds something as a CSR initiative or even to help them with their waste disposal themselves. That's a really good idea. But how do you convince some of these shops? Because I imagine at the beginning it wasn't just as simple as saying, yes, we're going to take your waste, your unsold food.
It was extremely difficult. But thankfully, and this is where the power of consumer activism cannot be underestimated. I think a lot of people think, well, what difference does it make me signing this petition or doing something on Twitter? It makes an enormous difference because ultimately these businesses have to respond to their customers. And increasingly, food waste at a retail store level is being seen as unacceptable. And the best way to describe it really is to use analogy. So in the same way that child labour was once endemic in the fashion industry, it is now absolutely not acceptable. The same is starting to happen in both the food retail industry and also the events industry. These are two industries where food waste has been seen as a necessary byproduct, perhaps the dark underbelly of those industries. But leaders at organisations, CEOs, say at Pret-a-Manger, at Tesco, are really leading the way and saying we are going to have zero food waste stores. And that then sets the pace and sets the level of ambition for everybody else.
Yeah. I mean, it's remarkable. And you mentioned earlier already that it's not a charity.
No.
And so I looked at this, and the first question I had after I'd finished reading is like, I don't understand how you make any money at this.
Yeah.
How do people invest?
Yeah.
Why would they invest? How do you make any money about this? I mean, how does that work?
So I'll touch just first on the charity point. So we get very, very frustrated that there appears to be just this really clear dichotomy in most people's mind. You are a charity and you do good. You are a business.
And you are evil.
And you are evil and make an insane amount of money. If you actually look at what has to happen today, the biggest problems that we need to solve are in the area of sort of social issues and environmental issues, and they're things that need to be solved at scale. And I really, really believe that business as a construct is uniquely effective at solving problems at scale, and that actually the problems of the future will be solved by businesses that are generating profit with a purpose. And in fact, if you have a business model in the future that does not have purpose, then I don't think you will have a business model.
I think certainly with Gen Z, that purpose element is really important. But what's remarkable is that the number of people we've had sat in that chair who have had businesses that many people have questioned why they aren't charities, they've said that exact same thing about business with a purpose.
And it's very frustrating. So, and I'll come on and explain to you, because I know you want to know the $64 million question, how does Olio make money? But just to make this very real for you, we will have some businesses that we talk to who will say that they would rather, and they are, putting their food out on the street to be taken off to landfill than give it to Olio because we're not a charity. And yet, if you look at the impact that we're having, the people we're feeding, the number of people in need who are using Olio, it's indisputable. But people just don't seem to be able to get their heads around the fact that...
is that quite literally? I mean, it's, again, another one of those things that's shocking to hear, but it's that quite literally seems to be, we are a for-profit business, and we're not going to give away stuff that we can't use if it's going to go to another for-profit business. Is that essentially their narrative?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
So how do you win them over?
We would rather that goes on the streets. Now, being a startup, how we win them over is we don't. We have limited time, limited resources. We need to push on doors that are open. So we cut the conversations very short, and we go with the forward-thinking businesses, and we recognise that in a year, 2 years, 5 years, those businesses
will
come to us. So to answer your question about how we make money, the answer is we haven't for the first sort of 2.5 years. We are the world's only neighbour-to-neighbour food sharing app. There is no precedent for what we're doing, and so we have had to build a lot of stuff sort of from the ground up and figure out and do a ton of learning. So we're now in a position where we have just started monetising in Q4 of last year, and that was through charging the retailers for the service that we provide to enable them to have zero food waste stores. That model we're extremely excited by, and there's two aspects to that model. So there's a recurring model, so they are the food retailers who need that food redistributed every single day, and they have almost always worked with charities to redistribute as much as they can, but there is inevitably an enormous amount of food left that the charities cannot or will not take for a whole variety of reasons, and that's where Olio comes in. We're sort of very much the collector of last resort.
Yes.
So there's the recurring model, and we're also very excited by an ad hoc model there. So we're having a lot of inbound interest from the events industry in particular. So from kind of the small scale, every evening in London, there's like 1,000+ events taking place. They're all catered and clearly over-catered, all the way through to enormous events with tens of thousands of people. And that model is much more where it's a one-off pickup where we'll match one or multiple volunteers to that event to collect and redistribute the food.
So you must have learned a huge amount over the last 5 years. What? Let's have some of your lessons learned over the last 5 years.
If you don't ask, you don't get. And it can sometimes take a lot of courage to ask for something and to ask for help or to approach people who you wouldn't naturally interact with. But Olio has been built on that. And we've had to do that because we've had very, very limited resources. We quickly realised that Sasha and I couldn't do everything by ourselves. And so we've had to rely upon the goodwill of others. And they have willingly done that. So our volunteers are just an amazing example of that. We have had volunteers who have just grabbed what we've given them and run with it. And they have taken Olio on into their local media or onto TV, have won Environmentalist of the Year in their particular town or city or country. And they've really sort of made it their own. So yeah, definitely if you don't ask, you don't get. Persistence, resilience, grit.
Yep.
You need that in truck loads. But you can't be stubborn. You need to be open to feedback, I think. So you don't mistake sort of resilience and grit being sort of doggedly pursuing a single path, irrespective of feedback. You need to have sort of resilience, doggedness and grit with regards to fulfilling upon your mission. But actually, you need to be incredibly humble, incredibly agile, incredibly receptive to feedback through all the learnings that comes along the way.
I'm sure that there are several business books that suggest when you have a mission, it must be something that is broadly, it can be, visionary, but broadly people would look at it and think it achievable. And yours is quite remarkable. We want 1 billion people using Olio in 10 years' time. And you're on a mission to make that happen.
We are.
I think there are some people who might suggest 1 billion people. This is a significant proportion of the population of the globe. Yeah. So we're not really talking about, markets, EMEA, North America. This is now a global.
Yeah. So I think we've got sort of two things driving that. So one is our conviction that we have to achieve that. So just 10 days ago, the IPCC released their report. We have 12 years, which, by the way, is just over 4,000 days, to avert extreme climate catastrophe. Our life, as we all recognise it, will become unrecognisable. 4,000 days, that's it. So, and I've already told you about the role that food waste plays in climate change. So we're very driven by that's the sort of time scale that we need to be operating on. On the other hand, we're sort of buoyed up by our conviction because every single day we are interacting with our users who are telling us things like, Olio has transformed my life. This is the best thing that has ever happened to me. This is now my social circle. I have purpose, I have meaning, this is fun, which might sound very extreme to someone who's listening to this who hasn't tried it. But it does become a way of life. And in the same way, we like to sort of point to analogy. So Airbnb is a classic example of something that 5 or 10 years ago, if you had told someone that you were renting your bed to a stranger, they would have told you you were absolutely barking mad. Now, if you go on holiday for 2 weeks and you don't rent out your bed to a stranger, you're considered barking mad. So it does demonstrate that consumer mindset shift and behaviour shift can take place when the product is fantastic.
And you, Sasha, and Olio
enjoyable.
want to be at the forefront of that.
Yeah.
We do this little pop quiz, which I have to say I really enjoy. So here we go. Are you ready for my quick fire
I am, yes.
round? What profession other than your own would you like to attempt?
So I would love to be a psychologist or a therapist. I am so intrigued by
If you want
people.
to shadow for a day,
Thank
you
you.
are more than
Yes,
welcome.
that whole nature versus nurture thing, it intrigues me endlessly.
We could have, I see right now, I want to have a deep conversation about it's not always a dichotomy. Anyway,
No,
moving
I
on.
believe that, yeah.
Which business or company, apart from your own, do you wish you'd founded?
For me, that would probably have to be Google. Essentially, they have made the world's knowledge and 7.5 billion brains available and accessible to everybody. So it's incredibly meritocratic, and I think so many businesses have been built off the back of that. So I'm not saying that Google is perfect, but I do think sort of as a concept and what they've achieved, making the world's knowledge searchable is phenomenal.
What's your favourite non-swear word?
My favourite non-swear word. I will never forget coming across the word discombobulate for the first time, which was in America, actually.
Yes.
I had never heard that word, and it just it's just a wonderful word to say, discombobulate.
It is.
I love it.
Sounds better in an English accent, I always think. What's your least favourite word?
Moist.
That is so many people's least favourite word.
With the exception of when it's a moist chocolate cake, then it's all about context, and in that context, it's okay.
I have a feeling that we just made people's skin crawl twice.
Yeah,
with that
maybe
one.
we did. Yeah.
What's your biggest fault?
Well, my husband would definitely say that I'm just far too oblivious to the sort of details of life. You know, he will redecorate a room and I will walk into it and I just won't necessarily notice that because I'm too busy thinking about things.
Yep. Well done, by the way, for being one of the few people who answers that question without doing it like in an interview where your biggest fault is actually a strength.
No, it drives him crazy.
What's your idea of happiness?
My life right now. I'm doing something with purpose that I can be proud of, with just the most amazing team of people. And I have a wonderful family as well.
And what keeps you awake at night?
2 things keep me awake at night: fundraising for Olio and climate change, because both of them are extremely existential.
I have a feeling that after listening to this and watching this, many people will share some of your nightmares. Which figure from the world of entertainment, musician, author, actor, artist, would you like to go on a road trip with?
This one's easy, and Sasha would say the same as well. Leonardo DiCaprio. So he...
Climate change activist,
you know, used his Oscars acceptance speech to raise awareness of the problem, speaks at the UN, really sort of puts his money where the mouth is. But also he seems like a really fun guy, and he's, it's fairly easy on the eye too.
Well, I was waiting. I will say I was waiting for the last part to show up there as well. And what's your favourite swear word?
Well,
We're not on the BBC. You can actually say it.
I was talking about it with my husband last night, and my 5-year-old piped up with, "Mummy, you do say fuck." Quite a lot. So there you have it. I thought I wasn't bad with the naughty words, but obviously I am.
They are impressionable, or
Yes.
they are eavesdroppers,
Yes.
children. If heaven exists, what would you like God to say when you arrive?
So I would like God to say, "Good job. Well done."
It seems like it's an understated thing for a deity to say, but...
Well, do you know, I guess that's... I do actually often think, often maybe an exaggeration, but I do try and lead my life thinking, how would I feel on my deathbed? And up until doing Olio, even though I'd had an allegedly great career, I didn't personally feel particularly motivated by it or proud of it. So, yeah.
So Olio is part of your legacy.
Yeah, well, just feeling like I did something good and positive.
Absolutely. Well, that's it for Pioneers. My thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
No worries.
I will have nightmares now.
Sorry.
Climate change, but I think it's really important
We all
that
need to talk about
we
it.
consider this.
Yeah.
Don't forget that you can download previous episodes of the show and all of Joe's audio offerings from your usual podcast providers. Leave us a review if you'd be so kind, and we'll speak to you next week.
You've been watching Pioneers, together with Open Money. Manage it, save it, invest it.